years ago, I lived in Chattanooga. It wasn't an old farm, and I was between jobs and somehow ended up there. I occasionally drove the farm pickup to run errands and buy necessities to run the farm. It was an old truck and very unreliable at that. It was a manual and would get stuck in second gear often. One night, I went into town to pick up some groceries. On my way back, the usual route was closed due to a tractor-trailer accident, so I had to take a detour. This was before MapQuest or any similar gadgets were available. Of course, I got lost and ended up on a dirt road. It was really dark, and all of a sudden the clutch in the truck stopped working completely. I had no choice but to walk, and no cell phone either in that time, if you can imagine. I was somewhat familiar with the outskirts and decided my best bet would be a shortcut through the forest. The moon was full, so I used that as a guide. The deeper I got into the forest, the more alone I felt. To make matters worse, I heard something or someone moving around nearby. I stood still and it stood still. If I walked, it would walk. I had to keep my sanity and knew if I let whatever it was get the best of me, I may not survive. Was it a person, an animal, or whatever it was, I decided it was not my time to go. I ran past it several times and it seemed to always be in front of me, but following me regardless. I could hear cars in the distance and knew if I just kept going in that direction, I would eventually get out to safety. To this day, I have no idea what was around me or why. In my mind, I made a conscious decision to overcome my fear and escape the mysterious entity. It was not a choice, and mind over matter. It was August 14 and a meteor shower was going on until the 24th. I was curious to see, so I went out late at a certain time. It was exactly 1 a.m. I was outside the front of my house, standing in the middle of the road staring at the clear night sky, watching some meteors pass. I was doing that just by myself, and just a note, in front of my house across to the road is a good 5 acres of unclaimed desert land, and I'm from Arizona where Navajo Skinwalker seem to originate from. I was standing there once again when I heard odd noises. I'd want to say the crunching of a branch or something like that, but this noise came directly from in front of me, about 100 yards away. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but it's important to note that after this whole experience, I did my research and everything seemed to add up to my story. So I'll be explaining why I believe it was skinwalkers. It was kinda far away, but I once read a story and this person mentioned that the farther away the sounds of skinwalker might seem, the closer it actually is. I'm only mentioning this because not even 10 seconds later I heard very strange noises coming from the left side of the front of my house, and this was close to about 50 feet away. By this time, I was already spooked, as living in Arizona for 6 years, these noises were unfamiliar and different. I was always away out at night, and I could tell when it was just a desert rabbit or a couple of coyotes. As these strange noises occurred, the worst feeling I've ever felt the 17 years I've been alive came over me. It was strange and made me feel very uneasy. It was that gut feeling, like I knew something bad was going to occur or already occurring, that sense of impending doom. And just then, as fast as the noises started, they stopped. But it was a short pause because I heard faint talking coming from where the spot the noises had happened. It sounded just like some little girl and I couldn't make out a single word. It was quiet, faint, and practically gibberish, but it was feminine and I know that much. It stopped again and then immediately after, clear as day, twice as loud as the talking before, it said my name. It called out to me in the voice of a little girl. In that very moment, I don't think I've ever been more truly terrified. Safe to say, I was super freaked out now and I began to walk toward my front door. Just a note, I read that skinwalkers tend to mimic the voices of people and sound very human-like in order to lure people in. I also read that in most cases with kids, skinwalkers will purposefully lurk around or near houses. My heart was racing at this moment, and that gut feeling I got was still there. Just as bad, if not even worse. I was at the bottom of my driveway now, and I already turned around heading for the front door of my house. As bad and freaky as things already were, you'd figure things couldn't get any worse, and that was until on the right side of me I heard the gravel of our front yard crunch. It was deep and long. 2 crunches coming towards me now and not any further than 20 feet away. Unfortunately, I hadn't seen anything with my own eyes, as it was dark and the steps had occurred on the opposite sides of my sister's cars to the right of me. I didn't have a clear line of sight as I walked up the driveway, and at this moment I was scared out of my literal mind. When I heard the crunch of the gravel, I was on the verge of calling out or even yelling at whatever thing was coming towards me. But I didn't. I refrained from doing it as my gut told me that initiating something like that would most likely make things worse. I tried my best to keep my composure, and the entire inside of me was collectively screaming as a whole at the time. I was at the top of my driveway now, and my driveway is slanted. I was no more than maybe 5 feet from the door when on both sides of me these sounds or steps picked up faster, coming towards me. Fortunately for me, I didn't acknowledge the things that happened at the time, or at least I tried my best to ignore it for my own safety, and I also didn't initiate anything with whatever was truly out there. I made it to the door and locked it quickly behind me. But things just got freakier from there. Whatever had just happened had me scared out of my mind, and you know how when you have a bad feeling it tends to go away after the so-called bad thing happens? Well, that feeling hadn't gone away. I was still on high alert, and I put the cover over our large dog door, and I locked the back door, the garage door, and made sure all windows were locked. That bad feeling almost never went away that whole night. I was still freaked out after what just happened, and everyone was asleep. I trusted that my sister was still awake, and I went to her room. Unfortunately, she wasn't, and in the middle of her sleep, she said I could come in, so I sat on the carpet floor of her bedroom anxiously, praying nothing bad would happen again. Of course, my sister is the only one in the house who keeps her blinds up at night, and God knows why. And of course, the screen of her window had fallen off and she never bothered to put it back on, so it was just glass. I could see the entire dog backyard, and if there was anything in my backyard, it could see me now too. I sat in her room for a good while, and I want to say maybe 15 minutes had passed when, out of nowhere, I heard faint whistling. Very faint, but however close it didn't matter. I sat in a room for a good while, and I want to say about 15 minutes had passed when out of nowhere I heard faint whistling. Very faint, but it was coming straight from my backyard. It was getting closer, and that whistling began to sound like a flute. I couldn't believe it, and I didn't want to believe it. Again, just a note, upon reading another person's story, it is believed that I could have heard the flute of a Navajo or a Navajo witch, which is directly related to skinwalkers. So now, in the comfort of my own home, came this strange music. Once I had identified it sounded like flute music, I was gone. I quickly got up and told my sister good night and didn't say a word after and left her room. I was still freaked out, alone, and everyone was asleep. I turned on some lights and sat at the bar in my kitchen. At one point, I even sought to wake up my dad just so I could be in the comfort of another person, but I was 17. As I sat, once again came the faint crunching of gravel rocks from my backyard. But this time, whatever was there, I could hear it, as I was no more than 5 feet away from it now. And just then, out of nowhere, I heard a small short knock on the glass of the back door. I didn't notice it at first until I took notice as it didn't seem to stop. I waited, and with every 1 minute came one singular knock. This just scared me even more, and Skinwalker or not, something was on the other side of that door. I wasn't going to stick around to find out, and luckily for me, my back door has a cover and it's also just glass. I flicked off the lights and walked towards my bedroom. I didn't bother to look at the back door, and I stayed in my room the rest of the night, and I never left. I was up there for a good 3 hours after everything had occurred, and even then I heard strange noises from outside my very own window. I remained freaked out for the rest of the night, and all the way up until I fell asleep the next morning, everything seemed fine. I truly don't know what happened that night, but I'm glad I went with my God. I might not be here if I hadn't.